Hi, I'm Micah Clark. Thank you for joining us today on our podcast. I have a great guest with us today, someone who's been in the legislature for quite a while, has great perspective, and I just wanted you to learn about this state representative because he shares your values. And so we have with us today State Representative Bruce Borders. Bruce, it's great to have you on. Tell us about yourself and about your district and a little bit about your political career.
Well, a number of years ago, many years ago, I used to teach an adult Sunday school class at the Methodist Church in Jasonville, Indiana. And I remember being frustrated with some things I thought the city should be doing and wasn't doing well and so forth. Well, a lot of the members of my Sunday school class, they said, why don't you run for mayor? And quite frankly, I was young. I was only 27 at the time that I was running, 28 by the time I was elected into office. And, but I ran and ended up winning, and then ran again 4 years later, and the Lord blessed us with a landslide victory, quite frankly. But I served as 8 years for mayor, and then we moved out into the countryside. We owned 10 acres outside of the city limits. And I had no intentions of getting back into the political arena. I wasn't dissatisfied with it or anything. I just, we were busy raising our three children, and we had built a new home out on the acreage that we owned. And anyhow, Senator John Waterman approached me about running for the state reps position in District 45, which is in Southwest Indiana, starting approximately on the south end of Terre Haute and going down to the city of Vincennes. And I ran and was actually defeated, barely lost by around 200 votes out of around 26,000 or something like that. And so anyhow, and in fact, the Republican Party, quite frankly, viewed it as a district that was unwinnable by a Republican because it had been carved out for John Gregg, the Speaker of the House, and he also ran for governor twice as well, and he lives in that district, and in fact he and I have become good friends over the years, but nonetheless, the district was considered unwinnable by a Republican, and then 2 years later, I was persuaded by some friends to give it another try since the race was so close, and I ended up winning by I think 12 percentage points or something like that. And so I've been there and ever since, other than one other time whenever they redrew the maps, and my district had already been very heavily Democrat. In fact, at one time it was the most heavily Democrat district in the state of Indiana that was held by a Republican. And when I ran after the maps were redrawn, the district became even more heavily Democrat, which was the way it was drawn out. I ended up only losing by about 68 votes and ran again after that. So I've actually lost a couple of times. And then when I ran again, the next time I won by, I think, around 16 percentage points. So both times the Lord has allowed me to make a comeback, so to speak, and to not just come back and barely make it in, but we won by landslides both times.
So, Bruce, you're kind of unique because a lot of Republicans and a lot of Democrats have districts that favor their party, and you're in a marginal district that kind of has swung back and forth. So I'm curious, what type of issues are of importance to your district in kind of a swing district?
Well, first of all, actually, in my case, my district has been as high as 62% Democrat, and so it's been you have to really work hard in order to be elected, as you might say, an opposite party member in a district that's that heavily. In my case, I happen to be a Republican and what was formerly a heavily Democrat district. And so you just have to really work hard at it. But what I would also say, though, is that I didn't change my value set in order to win votes. What I had to do was to make people realize that my values were basically the same as theirs. They were pro-life, pro-Second Amendment. They would be not, supporting issues such as critical race theory. things
Hmm.
like that. And the bottom line is that what I had to convince them is that even though I might be Republican and the majority of my constituents might be Democrat, that our values were actually very similar. And I do think, excuse me, it. Sorry, I have to have a little more of that apple juice I've been drinking there. But the bottom line is that I think that people realize that, wait a minute, yeah, he's just because he's Republican doesn't mean that he's much different than the value set that we hold. And so that's over the course of time, I've received more and more and more of the Democrat vote, quite frankly, and I needed that plus the Republican vote to win, actually.
Well, Bruce, most Republicans in your position, if they were elected to a marginal district or a district they were concerned about hanging on to, they wouldn't cast some of the votes you cast. I mean, you quite often.
Yeah.
I mean, I've watched you for years. We've been friends for years, but I've seen. I look at the vote tallies on certain bills, and there's a lot of times where you'll vote against your party. You'll vote always conservative, but a lot of legislators would never do that. They'd never take a strong stand in the way that you have because of your district. What causes you to take the stands you do? Because you not only do you do that, I know you'll go to forums and you tell people exactly where you are. And frankly, a lot of politicians would be scared to death to do that in a district for fear they might lose it.
Well, it's like I was talking to members of our caucus one day, and I was being um, basically kind of lambasted for one of my votes. In fact, I can tell you which issue it was. It was on the RFRA issue, Religious
Hmm.
Freedom and Restoration Act. And from what I remember, I think there were only three of us that voted against that particular bill because it was an attack on religious freedom. And anyhow, I won't say who, but an individual who was in a prominent leadership position at that time just blew up at me in caucus and made a comment about how I was putting everybody else on the spot because I refused to compromise. And I said, no, I said they have their free will to vote as they will, but I said this is a matter of attacking religious freedom. I'm not going to do it, and I won't give in. So then they tried to persuade me to just walk off the House floor and not vote at all. And I said, no, I'm not going to do that either. I said, I don't skip votes. And I said, and I particularly don't skip votes on issues as important as religious freedom. And I said, at the end of my life, I answer to an audience of one. And
Hmm.
then in this case, I looked at that individual and I said, and you're not him. And I said, the bottom line is, I said, I've got to do it as unto the Lord. And
Hmm.
I'm not perfect, but I really do try to do all things as unto the Lord. And so on these issues, it's like, I know it's a tough arena that we're in up there, but I trust God to see me through these issues. And if it's an issue that I feel like that I just simply can't compromise in or compromise on, I just won't do it.
Well, Bruce, I think I've told you this before, and you probably know this because you're extremely smart on politics. But I was talking to somebody one time who ran campaigns for the House Republican Reelection Campaign Committee, which is you
Mm-hmm.
know what that is, and he told me unsolicited that you were one of the most popular state representatives in their entire Republican caucus in terms of being liked, popularity, and I think it's because people know what they get, even if they don't agree with you on everything. They know you're straightforward and honest, and you're not the typical politician. So I appreciate that about you. I appreciate the stands you take. I've never once, I don't think ever had a vote where you and I disagree that I could think of on my core issues. And I want to thank you for your
Sure.
stand for families. But two issues that are hot button issues that again, in a marginal district, some people might think, why would you file a bill on this? But last week, 2 weeks ago, we had Senator Jim Toms, who you know well, to
Oh, sure.
discuss
Mm-hmm.
matter harmful to minors or sexually explicit books in schools, which finally got through. But you filed a bill on that this year, so let's remind our audience what that issue is about a little bit.
Well, basically, I mean, in some of the public libraries, whether it be at a school or whether it be at a general public library, materials were being distributed or made available that were harmful to minors, from a moral standpoint. And so what it did is it basically says, no, these things are not going to be available in our public libraries. And it was like, why would anybody want that stuff in there to begin with? And then and so I think, obviously it wasn't my bill that made it to the end of the day, but I could care less about that. It's like I tell people, I say, if I file a bill and somebody else files it and it's the same or similar subject matter, if it's something that I strongly believe in, I could care less whose name is on there as the author or the co-author, whatever, because at the end of the day, I'm still going to support it, and I still had just as much of a hand in it becoming law as if it were the bill that I'd authored. So authorship doesn't mean anything to me. At the end of the day, I just want to make sure that good policy becomes law.
Right. Well, on a similar bill, you also filed a bill this year that became law. Senate Bill 480 that came from the Senate side prohibited transgender surgeries on minors and transgender drugs, asking kids to wait till they're 18. And you filed a bill on that in the House, House Bill 1525. Why don't we tell our audience a little bit about that issue as well?
Well, I think some of the best conversations I had were with either parents who were already actively doing this with a child or grandparents. And I can remember at one public forum I was at, there was a grandmother there who was, and when I say this, I don't want people to think of some loving, doting grandmother. She was a very, very much in your face type of individual. And I can remember telling her, I said, what you're looking at doing is utterly evil. I mean, some things can't be described as politically incorrect. They're just evil. And that's what I told her. I said, God made us male and female. And I did an interview one time where a reporter was asking me about, a certain individual, a famous individual who was going through the transgender transformation. And I made the comment, I said, this individual is never going to be a female. They will just be a male that's done certain, physical manipulations or taken hormones and wear dresses and wigs and so forth. And I said, basically, they're simply a self-mutilating cross-dresser. And they really, truly are. And the reporter said, are you sure you want me to say that on TV, or that, will you allow this to be said on TV? I said, why not? I said, it's true. And what frustrates me is that we try to dance around these issues sometimes in the public arena. And let's just label it as it is. And these transgender, transformations, first of all, it is never going to result in a male becoming a female or a female becoming a male. And the bottom line is, as I look at Romans, the first chapter, and it talks about, certain individuals with certain, sexual deviancies that, the Lord will no longer wrestle with them and turn them over to a reprobate mind. But when I look at what was being done with these children, the bottom line is, the key word is children or their child. It's truly contemptible and evil that we were allowing those types of transformations to even be done. And as far as I'm concerned, let me turn this off. Sorry about that. Sorry. But the bottom line is that it's simply unthinkable that this was ever allowed to begin with, and so it needed to be stopped for the sake of these children. And and as far as I'm concerned, anybody that would go down that path, I can't fathom their mindset or the condition of their spirit that they would allow that to be done to a child.
Well, we know from research, if a child's allowed to go through puberty, 80% of the time they will revert to their actual biological self once they go through puberty. And I've talked to you about this too. They call it gender affirming care, but it's actually just the opposite. You're gender hiding. It's gender masking. It's not gender affirming. When you remove a girl's breast, you're not affirming her gender. You're distorting it.
Absolutely.
it's sad because you think about the things that we don't allow minors to do. They can't vote. They can't buy a gun. They can't drink alcohol. They can't drive a car till they're
Right.
older. Why would we allow a 7-year-old to mutilate their body?
Right.
It's astonishing. Unfortunately, Indiana doesn't always lead on a lot of issues, but we were one of the early states to do this. And I think now over 17 states have done this. And
Yeah,
so,
yeah, and it's well, and the thing of it is as you know, Micah, we're living in, we're seeing some very evil things being done on a
mhm,
federal level, and quite frankly, I mean, there comes a time where you just have to say, listen, I don't care what might be popular, and what I'm finding is that you'd mentioned that I'm very outspoken on certain issues, which I am. I mean, I'm sure there are times that my colleagues probably wish I wasn't quite as much so. But having said that, what I found is that like the public arena, I don't go in there looking for affirmation from people. I go in there looking to teach and to educate, and if they disagree with me, that's okay. So be it. That I don't have to change what I believe in just to try to pacify somebody. I'm simply not going to do that.
yeah. Well, I hope you enjoyed that interview with Bruce Borders, part one. Part two will be next week. You'll see a lot more about Bruce, his personality, and some of his personal stories. But we're also going to be talking next week about campaigning in a tough district. So if you're interested in running for office or want to help a candidate, I think you'll enjoy next week's show when he talks a little bit about some of the unconventional things he does as a candidate. But thank you for joining us today, and I hope you'll join us next week. Share this video with your friends. And as always, I hope you have a great weekend. I'm Micah Clark, American Family Association of Indiana.